16. The start for South Africa. The Black Week, volunteering, the Langman Hospital, the voyage, Bloemfontein, Sir Claude de Crespigny, the epidemic, advance to the water works. From December 10 to 17, 1899, was the Black Week for England. In that week General Gattaca lost a battle at Stormberg, Lord Methuen lost one at Margersfontein, and General Buller lost one at Colenso. The three together would not have made more than a minor action in the Great War to come, but at the time it seemed portentous. There were ominous stirrings on the continent also and rumours of a coalition. It was lucky for us that the German fleet was not yet in being and that our own was able to keep the ring, or we should soon have had some Lafayette in South Africa with perhaps a Yorktown to follow. However, it was bad enough as it was, but the nation as usual rose splendidly to the occasion, and everyone hastened to do what they could. Hence it was that I found myself early one morning at Hounslow, if I remember right, standing in a long queue of men who were waiting to enlist in the Middlesex Yeomanry. I had 1 or 2 friends in the regiment and hence my choice. The colonel, a grizzled soldier, sat behind a deal table in an orderly room and dealt swiftly with the applicants. He had no idea who I was, but seeing a man of 40 before him he intimated that I surely did not intend to go into the ranks. I said that I was prepared to take a commission. He asked if I could ride and shoot. I said that I could do both in moderation. He asked if I had had military experience. I said that I had led an adventurous life and seen a little of military operations in the Sudan, which was stretching it about as far as it would go. 2 white lies are permitted to a gentleman, to screen a woman, or to get into a fight when the fight is a rightful one. So I trust one may be forgiven. However, the colonel would only put me on his waiting list, took my name, still without recognizing me, and passed on to the next case. I departed somewhat crestfallen and unsettled, not knowing whether I had heard the last of the matter or not. Almost immediately afterwards, however, I received an offer which took me out in a capacity which was less sporting but probably in my case and at my age a good deal more useful. This came from my friend John Langman, whose son Archie I had known well in Davos days. Langman was sending out a hospital of 50 beds at his own expense to Africa, and had already chosen his staff of surgeons but not his personnel. Archie Langman was to go with the hospital as general manager. Langman's idea was that I should help him to choose the personnel, that I should be a supplementary medico, and that I should exercise a general supervision over the whole in an unofficial capacity. To all this I agreed and spent a week at his house at Stanhope Terrace, choosing from many candidates those who seemed the most likely. On the whole they proved to be a worthy choice. There were many things to be done, and in the middle of them I received a note reopening the question of the yeomanry, but by this time I was entirely committed to the Langman Hospital. When we were complete we were quite a good little unit, but our weakness was unfortunately at the head. Dr. O'Callaghan had been a personal friend of Langman's and had thus got the senior billet, but he was in truth an excellent gynecologist, which is a branch of the profession for which there seemed to be no immediate demand. He was a man too who had led a sedentary life and was not adapted, with all the will in the world, for the trying experience which lay before us. He realized this himself and returned to England after a short experience of South African conditions. We were compelled to have one military chief, as a bond with the War Office, and this proved to be one Major Drury, a most amusing Irishman who might have come right out of Lever. To leave the service and to marry a rich widow with a cough was, he said, the height of his ambition. He was a very pleasant companion in civil life, but when it came to duties which needed tact and routine he was rather too Celtic in his methods, and this led to friction and occasional rows in which I had to sustain the point of view of Mr. Langman. I have no doubt he thought me an insubordinate dog, and I thought him, well, he has passed away now, and I remember him best as a very amusing companion. Under O'Callaghan and Drury were 2 really splendid younger surgeons, Charles Gibbs and Charlieb, the latter the son of the well-known lady doctor. They were as good as they could be. Then we had our ward masters, cooks, stewards, storekeepers, and finally some 15 to 20 orderlies. Altogether we numbered just 50 men, and were splendidly fitted out by the generosity of Mr. Langman. A month or 2 passed before we could get away, and I remember one amusing incident which occurred during that time. I had spent a good deal of thought over the problem how best to attack men who lay concealed behind cover. My conclusions were that it was useless to fire at them direct, since, if they knew their business, very little of them would be vulnerable. On the other hand, if one could turn a rifle into a portable howitzer and drop a bullet with any sort of rough general accuracy within a given area, then it seemed to me that life would hardly be possible within that area. If, for example, the position was 20,000 square yards in size, and 20,000 rifles were dropping bullets upon it, each square yard would sooner or later be searched and your mark would be a whole prostrate or crouching body. What I was really evolving, though I could not know it, was the machine gun barrage of dropping or vertical fire as practiced in the Great War. My principles were absolutely right and have not even yet received their full application. I wrote an article to the Times explaining my views, but so far as I know it had no results. Meanwhile, I was practicing how to turn a rifle into a howitzer. I fastened a large needle at the end of a thread to the back sight. When the gun pointed straight up in the air, the needle swung down across the stock and I marked the spot. Then the idea was to tilt the gun slowly forward, marking advances of 200, 400 and so on in the range, so that you had a dial marked on the stock and could always, by letting the needle fall across the correct mark on the dial, drop the bullet within a certain distance. But the crux was to discover the exact ranges. To do this I went down to Frensham Pond and, standing among the reeds and tilting the gun very slightly forward, I pulled the trigger. The bullet very nearly fell upon my own head. I could not locate it, but I heard quite a loud thud. But what amazed me, and still amazes me, was the time it took. I counted 50 seconds on my watch between the discharge and the fall. I don't wonder if the reader is incredulous. I feel incredulous also, but such is the fact as I recorded it. My idea was to mark the bullet splashes on the calm water of the lake, but though I fired and fired at various angles, not a splash could I see. Finally, a little man who may have been an artist broke in upon my solitude. "Do you want to know where those bullets were going?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Then I can tell you, sir, for they have been dropping all round me." I felt that unless my howitzer was to claim its first victim on the spot, I had better stop. It was clear that the light bullet with so heavy a charge went so high into the atmosphere that one lost all command over it. Twice the weight and half the charge would have served my purpose better. Then came other calls and I could never work it out, but I am very sure that with a little care in detail I could have got a converging fire which would have cleared any copy in South Africa. As I was convinced that the idea was both practical and much needed, I communicated full particulars to the War Office. Here is the letter I had in reply. War Office, February 16, 1900. Sir, with reference to your letter concerning an appliance for adapting rifles to high-angle fire, I am directed by the Secretary of State for War to inform you that he will not trouble you in the matter. I am, sir, your obedient servant, signature illegible, Director General of Ordnance. Thus, whether my invention was nonsense or whether it was, as I believe, radical and epoch-making, I was given no chance to explain or to illustrate it. As I remarked in other times, no wonder that we find the latest inventions in the hands of our enemies rather than ourselves if those who try to improve our weapons meet with such encouragement as I have done. Our traditions were carried on in the Great War, for Pomeroy, the inventor of the inflammable bullet which brought down the Zeppelins, was about to return to New Zealand in despair, and it was, as I am assured, private and not official bullets which first showed how valuable was his discovery and forced a belated acceptance by the War Office. At last our time drew near. My wife had gone to Naples, where it was hoped that the warmer climate would complete her cure. My affairs were all settled up. I was to go as an unpaid man, and I contributed my butler Cleve, a good intelligent man for the general use, paying him myself. In this way I retained my independence and could return when I felt that the time had come, which, as events turned out, proved to be very valuable to me. We were reviewed by the old Duke of Cambridge in some drill hall in London. There befell me on this occasion one of those quaint happenings which seem to me to have been more common in my life than in that of most other men. We were drawn up in our new khaki uniforms, and wearing our tropical helmets, for the Royal Duke's inspection. If we had been asked to form fours, we should have broken down completely, but luckily we were placed in double line and so we remained. I was standing in front on the right flank. With my eyes fixed rigidly before me, I was still able out of the corner of them to be aware that the old Duke, with his suite, was coming across to begin at my end. Presently he halted in front of me and stood motionless. I remained quite rigid, looking past him. He continued to stand, so near me that I could hear and almost feel his puffy breath. What on earth? I wondered, but I gave no sign. At last he spoke. What is this? He asked. Then louder, what is this? And finally, in a sort of ecstasy, what is it? I never moved an eyelash, but one of a group of journalists upon my right went into hysterical but subdued laughter. There was whispering among the suite, something was explained, and the funny old man passed on. But did ever Lever in his maddest moment represent that his hero on the first day of wearing uniform should have such an experience with the ex-commander-in-chief of the British Army and the uncle of the Queen? It seems that what was worrying the dear old gentleman, he was about 80 at the time, was that my tunic buttons had no mark upon them, a thing which he had never seen in Her Majesty's army. Even a crown or a star would do, but no mark at all completely upset him, for he was a great stickler for correct military clothing. So, of course, was King Edward. A friend of mine at a ball in India, royalty being present, was swooped down upon by a very agitated aide-de-camp who began, "His Royal Highness desires me to say," and went on to point out some defect in his dress kit. My friend answered, "I will mention the matter to my tailor," which was, I think, an admirable way of quietly putting the matter into its true perspective. On this occasion we officers all filed up to be presented, and the old Duke made amends by blurting out some very kindly things, for it seems that he greatly approved of my wooden soldier attitude, in spite of my reprehensible buttons. He had a day of agitations, for on the top of the buttons one of the curtains of the hotel took fire during our luncheon at Claridge's, and there was great excitement for a few moments. He made, I remember, an extremely indiscreet speech in which he said, "They turned me off because they said I was too old, but old as I am I wouldn't have been such a fool as to," and then he strung off a number of things which Lord Wolseley, his successor, was supposed to have done. The press was merciful and did not report. We sailed on February 28, 1900, from Tilbury, in the chartered transport Oriental, carrying with us a mixed lot of drafts, and picking up the Royal Scots Militia at Queenstown, where a noisy Irishwoman threw a white towel on board, crying, "You may be after her finding it useful." The Scots were a rather rough crowd with a number of territorial magnates, Lord Henry Scott, Lord Tewkesbury, Lord Newport, Lord Brackley, and others among their officers. Colonel Garstin of the Middlesex was in general command of the whole of us. The monotony of the 3 weeks' voyage was broken only by a cricket match at the Cape de Verdes, by a lecture on the war which I delivered on deck under a tropical moon to all hands, and to an enteric inoculation, which was voluntary but should have been compulsory, for even as it was it saved many lives, and I am not sure that my own was not among them. The Great War has shown forever how effective this treatment is. We lost more from enteric than from the bullet in South Africa, and it is sad to think that nearly all could have been saved had Almroth Wright's discovery been properly appreciated. His brother was on board, I remember, an officer of sappers, and took the virus particularly badly, though all of us were quite bad enough, for the right dose had not yet been accurately determined. On the evening of March 21 we reached Cape Town and found the bay full of shipping. There were 50 large steamers at anchor, mostly empty. Some of us had a run ashore, but we had some trouble getting on board again, for there was a big swell and the little tug dare not come quite alongside. We had to jump therefore from the paddle box as the roll favoured us, landing on a hanging ladder, where a quartermaster seized us. To some people such a feat is easy, while others evidently regarded it with horror, and I wondered that we escaped from having some tragedy. The only real mishap was a strange one. A row of soldier faces was looking down on us over the bulwarks, when I saw the grin upon one of them change to a look of horrible agony, and he gave a wild scream. He still remained standing, but several men ran towards him, and then he disappeared. Only afterwards did I learn that a huge iron bar had in some way fallen upon his foot, pinning him to the place. He fainted as they disengaged him, and was carried below with his bones crushed. I spent next day ashore, with the Mount Nelson Hotel as my headquarters. It was full of a strange medley of wounded officers, adventuresses, and cosmopolitans. Kitchener came down and cleared it out shortly afterwards, for the Sirens were interfering with his fighting men. The general war news was very good. Paardeberg had been fought, Lord Roberts had made his way to Bloemfontein, and Kimberley had been relieved by French, whose immediate return to head off Cronje was one of the inspired incidents of the war. It was a consolation to find that Boers really could be captured in large numbers, for their long run of successes while the conditions were in their favour was getting badly upon the public nerves, and a legendary sort of atmosphere was beginning to build up around them. Some money had been given me for charitable purposes when I was in London, so I went down to the camp of the Boer prisoners to see if I could spend some of it. It was a racecourse, pent in with barbed wire, and they were certainly a shaggy, dirty, unkempt crowd, but with the bearing of free men. There were a few cruel or brutal faces, some of them half-caste, but most were good honest fellows, and the general effect was formidable. There were some who were maned like lions. I afterwards went into the tents of the sick Boers. Several were sitting sullenly round, and one was raving in delirium, saying something in his frenzy which set all the others laughing in a mirthless way. One man sat in a corner with a proud dark face and brooding eagle eyes. He bowed with grave courtesy when I put down some money for cigarettes. A Huguenot, or I am mistaken. We had been waiting for orders, and now we suddenly left Cape Town on March 26th, reaching East London on the 28th. There we disembarked, and I was surprised to find Leo Trevor, of amateur theatrical fame, acting as transport officer. In spite of his efforts, I hope it was not through them, our hospital stuff was divided between two trains, and when we reached Bloemfontein after days of travel we found that the other half had wandered off and was engulfed in the general chaos. There were nights of that journey which I shall never forget, the great train roaring through the darkness, the fires beside the line, the dark groups silhouetted against the flames, the shouts of "Who are you?" and the crash of voices as our mates cried back, "The Camerons," for this famous regiment was our companion. Wonderful is the atmosphere of war. When the millennium comes, the world will gain much, but it will lose its greatest thrill. It is a strange wild place, the veldt, with its vast green plains and peculiar flat-topped hills, relics of some extraordinary geological episode. It is poor pasture, a sheep to 2 acres, so it must always be sparsely inhabited. Little white farms, each with its eucalyptus grove and its dam, were scattered over it. When we crossed the Free State border by a makeshift bridge, beside the ruins of the old one, we noticed that many of these little houses were flying the white flag. Every one seemed very good-humoured, burghers and soldiers alike, but the guerrilla war afterwards altered all that. It was April 2nd, and 5 a.m. when we at last reached the capital of the Free State, and were dumped down outside the town in a grey-green expanse covered with all sorts of encampments and animals. There was said to be a large force of Boers close to the town, and they had cut up one of our columns a few days before at Sarna's post. Some troops were moving out, so I, with Gwyn whom I had known in Egypt, and that great sportsman Claude de Crespigny, set forth to see what we could, an artilleryman lending me his led horse. There was nothing doing, however, for it was Brother Boer's way never to come when you wanted him and always when you didn't. Save for good company, I got nothing out of a long hot day. Good company is always one of the solaces of a campaign. I ran across many old friends, some soldiers, some medicos, some journalists. Knight of the Falcon had, alas, been hit in an early battle and was in hospital. Julian Ralph, a veteran American correspondent, Bennett Burley the rugged old war horse, queer little Melton Pryor who looked like the prim headmaster of a conventional school, dark-eyed Donahue of the Chronicle, Patterson the Australian, of Snowy River fame, they were a wonderful set of men. I had little time to enjoy their society, however, for among the miles of loaded trucks which lay at the endless sidings I had to my great joy discovered the missing half of our equipment and guided a fatigue party down to it. All day we laboured, and before evening our beds were up and our hospital ready for duty. 2 days later wagons of sick and wounded began to disgorge at our doors, and the real work had begun. We had been given the cricket field as our camp and the fine pavilion as our chief ward. Others were soon erected, for we had plenty of tents, one each for our own use and a marquee for the mess. We were ready for any moderate strain, but that which was put upon us was altogether beyond our strength, and for a month we had a rather awful time. The first intimation of trouble came to me in a simple and dramatic way. We had a bath in the pavilion, and I had gone up to it and turned the tap, but not a drop of water appeared, though it had been running freely the night before. This small incident was the first intimation that the Boers had cut the water supply of the town, which caused us to fall back upon the old wells, which in turn gave rise to an outbreak of enteric which cost us 5,000 lives. The one great blot in Lord Robert's otherwise splendid handling of the campaign was, in my opinion, that he did not buzz out at once with every man he could raise, and relieve the water works, which were only 20 miles away. Instead of this, he waited for his army to recuperate, and so exposed them to the epidemic. However, it is always easy to be wise after the event. The outbreak was a terrible one. It was softened down for public consumption, and the press messages were heavily censored, but we lived in the midst of death, and death in its vilest, filthiest form. Our accommodation was for 50 patients, but 120 were precipitated upon us, and the floor was littered between the beds with sick and often dying men. Our linen and utensils were never calculated for such a number, and as the nature of the disease causes constant pollution, and this pollution of the most dangerous character and with the vilest effluvia, one can imagine how dreadful was the situation. The worst surgical ward after a battle would be a clean place compared to that pavilion. At one end was a stage with the scene set for HMS Pinafore. This was turned into latrines for those who could stagger so far. The rest did the best they could, and we did the best we could in turn. But a Verestchagin would have found a subject in that awful ward, with the rows of emaciated men, and the silly childish stage looking down upon it all. In the very worst of it, 2 nursing sisters appeared among us, and never shall I forget what angels of light they appeared, or how they nursed those poor boys, swaddling them like babies and meeting everyone with gentle courage. Thank God, they both came through safe. For weeks may seem a short time in comfort, but it is a very long one under conditions such as those, amid horrible sights and sounds and smells, while a haze of flies spreads over everything, covering your food and trying to force themselves into your mouth, every one of them a focus of disease. It was bad enough when we had a full staff, but soon the men began to wilt under the strain. They were nearly all from the Lancashire cotton mills, little, ill-nourished fellows but with a great spirit. Of the 12 contracted the disease and added to the labours of the survivors. 3 died. Fortunately, we of the staff were able to keep going, and we were reinforced by a Dr. Shorts of Cape Town. The pressure was great, but we were helped by the thought that the greater the work, the more we proved the necessity of our presence in Africa. Above all, our labours were lightened by the splendid stuff that we had for patients. It was really glorious to see the steady patience with which they bore their sufferings. The British soldier may grouse in days of peace, but I never heard a murmur when he was faced with this loathsome death. Our hospital was no worse off than the others, and as there were many of them, the general condition of the town was very bad. Coffins were out of the question, and the men were lowered in their brown blankets into shallow graves at the average rate of 60 a day. A sickening smell came from the stricken town. Once when I had ridden out to get an hour or 2 of change, and was at least 6 miles from the town, the wind changed and the smell was all around me. You could smell Bloemfontein long before you could see it. Even now, if I felt that low deathly smell, compounded of disease and disinfectants, my heart would sink within me. At last there came the turn. The army had moved on. Hospitals up the line absorbed some of the cases. Above all, the waterworks had been retaken, and with hardly any resistance. I went out with the force which was to retake it, and slept for the night in a thin coat under a wagon, an experience which left me colder than I can ever remember being in my life, a cold which was not only on the surface, but like some solid thing within you. Next morning there was every prospect of a battle, for we had been shelled the night before and it looked as if the position would be held, so Ian Hamilton, who commanded, made a careful advance. However, there was no resistance, and save for some figures watching us from distant hills, there was no sign of the enemy. He had slipped away in the night. In the advance we passed over the drift at Sana's post where the disaster had occurred some weeks before. The poor artillery horses were still lying in heaps where they had been shot down, and the place was covered with every kind of litter, puttees, cholera belts, haversacks, and broken helmets. There were great numbers of Boer cartridge papers which were all marked split bullets. Manufactured for the use of the British government, London. What the meaning of this was, or where they came from, I cannot imagine, for certainly our fellows had always the solid Lee Metford bullet, as I can swear after inspecting many a belt. It sounded like some ingenious trick to excuse atrocities, and yet on the whole the Boer was a fair and good-humoured fighter until near the close of the war. The move of Hamilton's was really the beginning of the great advance, and having cleared the waterworks he turned north and became the right wing of the army. On his left was Tucker's 7th Division, then Kelly-Kenny's 6th Division, Paul Carew's 1st Division, including the Guards, and finally a great horde of mounted infantry, including the Yeomanry, the Colonial and the Irregular Corps. This was the great line which set forth early in May to sweep up from Bloemfontein to Pretoria. Things had become more quiet at the hospital, and presently Archie Langman and I found a chance to get away and to join the army at the first stage of its advance. I wrote our experience out while it was still fresh in my mind, and the reader will forgive me if I reproduce some of this, as it is likely to be more vivid and more detailed than the blurred impression now left in my memory after more than 20 years. 17 days with the army. Pole, Carew, Tucker, snipers, the looted farm, taking of Bran Fort, artillery engagement, advance of the Guards, the wounded scout, the dead Australian, return. Stand in the pass at Carew, and look north in the clear, fresh morning air. Before you lies a great plain, dull green, with white farmhouses scattered here and there. One great donga slashes it across. Distant hills bound it on all sides, and at the base of those in front, dimly seen, are a line of houses and a steeple. This is Bran Fort, 10 miles off, and we are advancing to attack it. The troops are moving forward, line after line of red face and khaki, with rumbling columns of guns. 2 men sit their horses beside us on a knoll, and stare with their glasses at the distant houses. Gallant figures both of them, the one spruce, debonair, well-groomed, with laughing eyes and upward curved moustache, a suggestion of schoolboy mischief about his handsome face, the other, grim, fierce, all nose and eyebrow, white scales of sun-dried skin hanging from his brick-red face. The first is Pole Carew, General of Division, the second is Brigadier Stevenson. We are finding our men, and these are among them. Here is another man worth noting. You could not help noting him if you tried. A burly, broad-shouldered man, with full, square, black beard over his chest, his arm in a sling, he's bearing a medieval knight-errant. It is Crabbe, of the Grenadier Guards. He reins his horse for an instant while his guardsmen stream past him. I've had my share, for bullets already. Hope I won't get another today. You should be in hospital. Ah, there I must venture to disagree with you. He rides on with his men. Look at the young officers of the Guards, the dandies of Mayfair. No carpet soldiers, these, but men who have spent 6 months upon the veldt, and fought from Belmont to Bloemfontein. Their walk is dainty, their puttees are well rolled, there is still the suggestion of the West End. If you look with your glasses on the left you may see movement on the farthest skyline. That is Hutton's mounted infantry, some thousands of them, to turn the flank of any resistance. As far as you can see to the right is Tucker's division. Beyond that again are Ian Hamilton's mounted infantry and French's cavalry. The whole front is a good 30 miles, and 35,000 men go to the making of it. Now we advance over the great plain, the infantry in extended order, a single E company covering half a mile. Look at the scouts and the flankers, we should not have advanced like that 6 months ago. It is not our additional numbers so much as our new warcraft which makes us formidable. The big donga is only 2,000 yards off now, so we halt and have a good look at it. Guns are unlimbered, just as well to be ready. Pole Carew rides up like a schoolboy on a holiday. Who seen old Tucker? I hear him say, with his glasses to his eyes. He had sent a message to the scouts. There now, look at that aid of mine. He has galloped along the donga to see if any Boers are in it. What right had he to do that? When I ask him, he will say that he thought I was there. Hello, you, sir, why don't you come back straight? I did, sir. You didn't. You rode along that donga. I thought you were there, sir. Don't add lying to your other vices. The aide came grinning back. I was fired at, but I dare not tell the old man. Rap! 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 Rifles in front. Everyone pricks up his ears. Is it the transient sniper or the first shot of a battle? The shots come from the farmhouse yonder. The 83rd Field Battery begin to fidget about their guns. The officer walks up and down and stares at the farmhouse. From either side 2 men pull out lines of string and give long, monotonous cries. They are the rangefinders. A gunner on the limber is deep in a sixpenny magazine, absorbed, his chin on his hand. Our scouts are past the house, says an officer. That's all right, says the major. The battery limbers up and the whole force advances to the farmhouse. Off saddle and a halt for luncheon. Hello! Here are new and sinister developments. A Tommy drives a smart buggy and pair out of the yard, looted for the use of the army. The farm is prize of war, for have they not fired at our troops? They could not help the firing, poor souls, but still this sniping must be discouraged. We are taking off our gloves at last over this war. But the details are not pretty. A frightened girl runs out. Is it right that they kill fowls? Alas! The question is hardly worth debating, for the fowls are dead. Erect and indignant, the girl drives in her 3 young turkeys. Men stare at her curiously, but she and her birds are not molested. Here is something worse. A fat white pig all smothered in blood runs past. A soldier meets it, his bayonet at the charge. He lunges and lunges again, and the pig screams horribly. I had rather see a man killed. Some are up in the loft throwing down the forage. Others root up the vegetables. One drinks milk out of a strange vessel, amid the laughter of his comrades. It is a grotesque and medieval scene. The general rides up, but he has no consolation for the women. The farm has brought it upon itself. He rides away again. A parson rides up. I can't imagine why they don't burn it, says he. A little Dutch boy stares with large, wondering grey eyes. He will tell all this to his grandchildren when we are in our graves. War is a terrible thing, says the mother, in Dutch. The Tommies, with curious eyes, cluster round the doors and windows, staring in at the family. There is no individual rudeness. One Kaffir enters the room. A Kaffir, cries the girl, with blazing eyes. Yes, a Kaffir, says he defiantly, but he left. They won't burn the house, will they? Cries the mother. No, no, we answer, they will not burn the house. We advance again after lunch, the houses and steeple much nearer. Boom! 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 Cannon at last. But it is far away, over at Tucker's side. There are little white puffs on the distant green hills. Those are shells bursting. If you look through your glasses you will see, 8 miles off, are a British battery in action. Sometimes a cloud of dust rises over it. That is a Boer shell which has knocked up the dust. No Boers can be seen from here. Boom! 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 It becomes monotonous. Old Tucker is getting it hot. Bother old Tucker, let us push on to Brandfort. On again over the great plain, the firing dying away on the right. We have had a gun knocked off its wheels and 12 men hit over there. But now Hutton's turning movement is complete, and they close in on the left of Brandfort. A pom-pom quacks like some horrid bird among the hills. Our horse artillery are banging away. White spurts of shrapnel rise along the ridge. The leading infantry bend their backs and quicken their pace. We gallop to the front, but the resistance has collapsed. The mounted men are riding forward and the guns are silent. Long, sunlit hills stretch peacefully before us. I ride through the infantry again. The bloody blister on my toe has bust. This blasted water bottle. Every second man has a pipe between his parched lips. The town is to the right, and 2 miles of plain intervene. On the plain a horseman is rounding up some mares and foals. I recognize him as I pass, Burdick Coots, a well-known figure in society. Mr. Maxwell of the Morning Post suggests that we ride to the town and chance it. Our men are sure to be there. No sign of them across the plain, but we will try. He outrides me, but courteously waits, and we enter the town together. Yes, it's all right, there's a Rymington scout in the main street, a group of them. A young Boer, new caught, stands among the horsemen. He is discomposed, not much. A strong, rather coarse face, well-dressed, might appear, as he stands, in an English hunting field as a young yeoman farmer. Comes of being fond of the ladies, said the Australian sergeant. Wanted to get her out of the town, said the Boer. Another was brought up. I'd have got off in a minute, says he. You'd have got off as it was if you had the pluck of a louse, says his captor. The conversation languished after that. In came the staff, galloping grandly. The town is ours. A red-headed Irish-American is taken on the copy. What the hell is that to you, he says to every question. He is hailed away to Gale, a foul-mouthed blackguard. We find the landlady of our small hotel in tears, her husband in Gale, because a rifle has been found. We try to get him out, and succeed. He charges us fours for half a bottle of beer, and we wonder whether we cannot get him back into Gale again. The house is not my own. I find great burly men everywhere, he cries, with tears in his eyes. His bar is fitted with pornographic pictures to amuse our simple farmer friends, not the first or the second sign which I have seen that pastoral life and a Puritan creed do not mean a high public morality. We sit on the stoop and smoke in the moonlight. There comes a drunken inhabitant down the main street. A dingy Tommy stands on guard in front. Halt! Who goes there? A friend. Give the countersign. I'm a free-born Englishman. Give the countersign. I'm a freeborn. With a rattle the sentry's rifle came to his shoulder and the moon glinted on his bayonet. Hi, stop, cries a senior correspondent. You juggins, you'll be shot. Don't fire, sentry. Tommy raised his rifle reluctantly and advanced to the man. What shall I do with him, sir? He asked the correspondent. Oh, what you like? He vanished out of history. I talk politics with free staters. The best opening is to begin, in an inquiring tone, why did you people declare war upon us? They have got into such an injured innocent state that it comes quite as a shock to them when they are reminded that they were the attackers. By this Socratic method one attains some interesting results. It is evident that they all thought they could win easily, and that they are very bitter now against the Transvaal. They are mortally sick of the war, but, for that matter, so are most of the British officers. It has seemed to me sometimes that it would be more judicious, and even more honourable, if some of the latter were less open about the extent to which they are fed up. It cannot be inspiriting for their men. At the same time there would be a mutiny in the army if any condition short of absolute surrender were accepted, and in spite of their talk, if a free pass were given today, I am convinced that very few officers would return until the job was done. Our railway engineers are great. The train was in Brandfort next day, in spite of broken bridges, smashed culverts, twisted metals, every sort of wrecking. So now we are ready for another 20 miles Pretoria wards. The Vet River is our goal this time, and off we go with the early morning. Another great green plain, with dotted farms and the huge khaki column slowly spreading across it. The day was hot, and 10 miles out the guards had about enough. Stragglers lay thick among the grass, but the companies kept their double-line formation, and plodded steadily along. 10 miles sounds very little, but try it in the dust of a column on a hot day, with a rifle over your shoulder, 100 rounds of ammunition, a blanket, a canteen, an empty water bottle, and a dry tongue. A grey-bearded padre limped bravely beside his men. No, no, says he, when offered my horse. I must not spoil my record. The men are silent on the march, no band, no singing. Grim and sullen, the column flows across the veldt. Officers and men are short in their tempers. "Why don't you, etc., etc., bleats a subaltern. "Because I never can hear what you say," says the corporal. They halt for a midday rest, and it seems to me, as I move among them, that there is too much nagging on the part of the officers. We have paid too much attention to the German military methods. Our true model should have been the American, for it is what was evolved by the Anglo-Celtic race in the greatest experience of war which the Anglo-Celtic race has ever had. On we go again over that great plain. Is there anything waiting for us down yonder where the low koppies lie? The Boers have always held rivers. They held the Modder. They held the Tugela. Will they hold the Vet? Hello, what's this? A startled man in a nightcap on a dapple-grey horse. He gesticulates. 50 of them, hot corner, lost my helmet. We catch bits of his talk. But what's that on the dapple-grey's side? The horse is shot through the body. He grazes quietly with black streaks running down the reeking hair. A West Australian, sir. They shot Turble bad, for we were within 50 yards before they loosed off. Which copy? That one over yonder. We ride forward, and pass through the open ranks of the guard skirmishers. Behind us the two huge naval guns are coming majestically up, drawn by their 30 oxen, like great hock bottles on wheels. In front a battery has unlimbered. We ride up to the side of it. Away in front lies a small, slate-roofed farm beside the koppie. The mounted infantry have coalesced into one body and are moving towards us. Here's the circus. There is going to be a battle, was an infantry phrase in the American War. Our circus was coming in, and perhaps the other would follow. The battery, 84th RFA, settles down to its work. Bang! I saw the shell burst on a hillside far away. 3,500, says somebody. Bang! 3,250, says the voice. Bang! 3,300. A puff shoots up from the distant grey roof as if their chimney were on fire. Got him that time. The game seems to us rather one-sided, but who is that shooting in the distance? What a hungry whine, and then a dull muffled oof. Up goes half a cartload of earth about 100 yards ahead of the battery. The gunners take as much notice as if it were a potato. Oof. 50 yards in front this time. Bang! Bang, go the crisp English guns. Oof. 50 yards behind the battery. They'll get it next time as sure as fate. Gunners go on unconcernedly. Oof. Right between the guns, by George. 2 guns invisible for the dust. Good heavens, how many of our gunners are left? Dust settles, and they are all bending and straining and pulling the same as ever. Another shell and another, and then a variety, for there comes a shell which breaks high up in the air, itang with a musical, resonant note, like the snapping of a huge banjo string, and 1/4 of an acre of ground spurted into little dust clouds under the shrapnel. The gunners take no interest in it. Percussion or shrapnel, fire what you will, you must knock the gun off its wheels or the man off his pins before you settle the RFA. But every shell is bursting true, and it is mere luck that half the battery are not down. Once only did I see a man throw back his head a few inches as a shell burst before him. The others might have been parts of an automatic machine. But the officer decided to shift the guns, and they are shifted. They trot away for half a mile to the right and come into action again. The lonely hero is the man to be admired. It is easy to be collectively brave. A man with any sense of proportion feels himself to be such a mite in the presence of the making of history that his own individual welfare seems for the moment too insignificant to think of. The unit is lost in the mass. But now we find ourselves alone on the plain with the battery away to the right. The nerves of the novice are strung up by the sound of the shells, but there is something of exhilaration in the feeling also. There is a fence about 200 yards off, and to this we tether our horses, and we walk up and down trying with our glasses to spot where the Boer guns are. We have suspicions, but nothing more. Our gunners may know, but we do not feel confident about it. Surely the stealthy lurking gun is worth 6 guns which stand bravely forth in the open. These farmers have taught our riflemen their business, and they bid fair to alter the artillery systems of the world as well. Our guns and theirs are like a fight between a blind man and one who can see. An artillery colonel is wandering loose, and we talk. He has no job of his own, so he comes, like the coachman on a holiday, to watch some other man's guns at work. A shell falls some distance short of us. The next one, says the colonel, will go over our heads. Come and stand over here. I do so, with many mental reservations. Here it comes, says the colonel. Here I go, think I. It burst on our level, but 40 yards to the right. I secure a piece as a souvenir. Shall we wait for another? I began to be sorry that I met the colonel. But a new sensation breaks upon us. Looking back, we see that 2 monster naval guns are coming into action not 50 yards from our tethered horses, which stand in a dead line before their huge muzzles. We only just got them clear in time. Bang! The father of all the bangs this time, and a pillar of white smoke with a black heart to it on the farther hill. I can see some riders, like ants, going across it, Boers on the trek. Our men take the huge brass cartridge case out of the gun. Can I have that? Certainly, says the lieutenant. I tie it onto my saddle, and feel apologetic towards my long-suffering horse. The grey gun roars, and the malignant spouts of smoke rise on the farthest hill. A line of infantry in very open order comes past the grey guns, and I advance a little way with them. They are Scots Guards. The first line goes forward, the second is halted and lying down. That's right. Show where you are, cries the second line, derisively. I seem to have missed the point, but the young officer in the first line is very angry. Hold your tongues, he shouts, with his red face looking over his shoulder. Too many orders. No one gives orders but me. His men lie down. The sun is sinking low, and it is evident that the contemplated infantry assault will not come off. One of the great naval shells passes high over our heads. It is the sound of a distant train in a tunnel. A man canters past with a stretcher over his shoulder. His bay horse lollops along, but the stretcher makes him look very top-heavy. He passes the guns and the infantry, and rides on along the edge of a maize field. He is half a mile out now, heading for the kopje. Every instant I expect to see him drop from his horse. Then he vanishes in a dip of the ground. After a time the stretcher appears again. This time 2 men are carrying it, and the horseman rides beside. I have bandages in my pocket, so I ride forward also. Has a surgeon seen him? No, sir. They lay the man down. There is a handkerchief over his face. Where is it? His stomach and his arm. I pull up his shirt, and there is the Mauser bullet lying obvious under the skin. It has gone round instead of penetrating. A slit with a penknife would extract it, but that had better be left for chloroform and the field hospital. Nice clean wound in the arm. You will do very well. What is your name? Private Smith, sir. New Zealander. I mention my name and the Langman Hospital at Bloemfontein. I've read your books, says he, and is carried onwards. There has been a lull in the firing and the sun is very low. Then after a long interval comes a last Boer shell. It is an obvious insult, aimed at nothing, a derisive good night and goodbye. The 2 naval guns put up their long necks and both roared together. It was the last word of the Empire, the mighty angry voice calling over the veldt. The red rim had sunk and all was purple and crimson, with the white moon high in the west. What had happened? Who had won? Were other columns engaged? No one knew anything or seemed to care. But late at night as I lay under the stars I saw on the left front signal flashes from over the river, and I knew that Hutton was there. So it proved, for in the morning it was over the camp in an instant that the enemy had gone. But the troops were early afoot. Long before dawn came the weird, muffled tapping of the drums and the crackling of sticks as the camp kettles were heated for breakfast. Then with the first light we saw a strange sight. A monstrous blister was rising slowly from the veldt. It was the balloon being inflated, our answer to the lurking guns. We would throw away no chances now, but play every card in our hand, another lesson which the war has driven into our proud hearts. The army moved on, with the absurd windbag flapping over the heads of the column. We climbed the koppies where the enemy had crouched, and saw the litter of empty Mauser cases and the sangers so cunningly built. Among the stones lay a packet of the venomous-looking green cartridges still unfired. They talk of poison, but I doubt it. Verdigris would be an antiseptic rather than a poison in a wound. It is more likely that it is some decomposition of the wax in which the bullets are dipped. Brother Boer is not a bushman after all. He is a tough, stubborn fighter who plays a close game but does not cheat. We say goodbye to the army, for our duty lies behind us and theirs in front. For them the bullets, for us the microbes, and both for the honor of the flag. Scattered trails of wagons, ambulance carts, private buggies, impedimenta of all kinds, radiate out from the army. It is a bad drift, and it will be nightfall before they are all over. We pass the last of them, and it seems strange to emerge from that great concourse and see the 20 miles of broad, lonely plain which lies between us and Brandfort. We shall look rather foolish if any Boer horsemen are hanging about the skirts of the army. We pass the battlefield of last night, and stop to examine the holes made by the shells. 3 had fallen within 10 yards, but the ant heaps round had not been struck, showing how harmless the most severe shellfire must be to prostrate infantry. From the marks in the clay the shells were large ones, 40-pounders, in all probability. In a little heap lay the complete kit of a guardsman, his canteen, water bottle, cup, even his puttees. He had stripped for action with a vengeance. Poor devil, how uncomfortable he must be today. A Kaffir on horseback is rounding up horses on the plain. He gallops towards us, a picturesque, black figure on his shaggy Basuto mount. He waves his hand excitedly towards the east. Englishman there, on veldt, hurt, Dutchman shoot him. He delivers his message clearly enough. Is he alive? He nods. When did you see him? He points to the sun and then farther east. About 2 hours ago apparently. Can you take us there? We buy him for 2s, and all canter off together. Our road is through maize fields and then out onto the veldt. By Jove, what's that? There is a single black motionless figure in the middle of that clearing. We gallop up and spring from our horses. A short, muscular, dark man is lying there with a yellow, waxen face, and a blood clot over his mouth. A handsome man, black-haired, black-moustached, his expression serene, number for 10 New South Wales Mounted Infantry, shot, overlooked and abandoned. There are evident signs that he was not alive when the Kaffir saw him. Rifle and horse are gone. His watch lies in front of him, dial upwards, run down at 1 in the morning. Poor chap, he had counted the hours until he could see them no longer. We examine him for injuries. Obviously he had bled to death. There is a horrible wound in his stomach. His arm is shot through. Beside him lies his water bottle, a little water still in it, so he was not tortured by thirst. And there is a singular point. On the water bottle is balanced a red chess pawn. Has he died playing with it? It looks like it. Where are the other chessmen? We find them in a haversack out of his reach. A singular trooper this, who carries chessmen on a campaign. Or is it loot from a farmhouse? I shrewdly suspect it. We collect the poor little effects of number for 10, a bandolier, a stylographic pen, a silk handkerchief, a clasp knife, a Waterbury watch, £2 6d in a frayed purse. Then we lift him, our hands sticky with his blood, and get him over my saddle, horrible to see how the flies swarm instantly onto the saddle flaps. His head hangs down on one side and his heels on the other. We lead the horse, and when from time to time he gives a horrid dive, we clutch at his ankles. Thank heaven, he never fell. It is 2 miles to the road, and there we lay our burden under a telegraph post. A convoy is coming up, and we can ask them to give him a decent burial. Number 10 holds one rigid arm and clenched fist in the air. We lower it, but up it springs, menacing, aggressive. I put his mantle over him, but still, as we look back, we see the projection of that raised arm. So he met his end, somebody's boy. Fair fight, open air, and a great cause. I know no better death. A long, long ride on tired horses over an endless plain. Here and there mounted Kaffirs circle and swoop. I have an idea that a few mounted police might be well employed in our rear. How do we know what these Kaffirs may do among lonely farms held by women and children? Very certain I am that it is not their own horses which they are rounding up so eagerly. 10 miles have passed, and we leave the track to water our horses at the dam. A black mare hard by is rolling and kicking. Curious that she should be so playful. We look again, and she lies very quiet. One more has gone to poison the air of the veldt. We sit by the dam and smoke. Down the track there comes a colonial corps of cavalry, a famous corps, as we see when our glasses show us the color of the cockades. Good heavens, will we never have sense beaten into us? How many disasters and humiliations must we endure before we learn how to soldier? The regiment passes without a vanguard, without scouts, without flankers, in an enemy's country intersected by Dongas. Oh, for a Napoleon who might meet such a regiment, tear the epaulets of the colonel from his shoulders, Stellenbosch him instantly without appeal or argument. Only such a man with such powers can ever thoroughly reorganize our army. Another 6 miles over the great plain. Here is a small convoy, with an escort of militia, only a mile or 2 out from Brandfort. They are heading wrong, so we set them right. The captain in charge is excited. There are Boers on that hill. The hill is only half a mile or so away on our left, so we find the subject interesting. Kaffirs, we suggest. No, mounted men with bandoliers and rifles. Why, there they are now. We see moving figures, but again suggest Kaffirs. It ends by our both departing unconvinced. We thought the young officer jumpy over his first convoy, but we owe him an apology, for next morning we learned that the mounted infantry had been out all night chasing the very men whom we had seen. It is likely that the accidental presence of the convoy saved us from a somewhat longer journey than we had intended. A day at Brandfort, a night in an open truck, and we were back at the Café Enterique, Boulevard des Microbes, which is our town address.